you would like to fix it not for credit, just for your own, okay, this is how I should be doing this, so I don't make the same mistake on the test, please do that either on the quiz on the back, get another sheet of paper, whatever. All the questions were worth 1 point, and I'll explain how the point system works. So in number 1, a common mistake I saw is that we saw this negative 67 and we were adding 67. We should not have been doing that, just dividing both sides by negative 67. My calculator. I think it was negative 14. One other thing I saw in general this class, my other AFDA class, make sure you're keeping the variables consistent. If you change it to x midway through, I don't know if you're still solving it for the same thing. So make sure you're keeping your variables consistent. Make sure this is n all the way through. Some of us forgot the negative because we didn't divide by the negative. So minor things like that. That's why you have the Desmos to double check yourself for your answers. But also, don't just put n equals negative 14 because then I don't know how you got there. Okay, questions about that one?
So it's like on the test, do we if we don't show our work all the way, do we still get points taken off like we did here?
Yes, it'll be very similar grading. The test will be very similar, unless you're doing the project, and that's completely different. Right. Number 2. Most of us did it this way, where we subtracted 8, which is what you should have done, but some of us did it another way, and I'll show you how that could have also worked. But we would have got negative 45 equals m. Now, if you added instead of subtracted, that would have gave you a different answer, and that would have made that wrong. Some of us, instead of moving 8, decided to move negative 37, which we can do as long as you keep the formatting up. So let's say I move 37. This now becomes 0. It doesn't move m over automatically. So that's an issue I saw a lot. You have to keep the 0 equals, rewrite it into its own equation, and then you created an extra step for yourself, which is fine. You just have to now move 45 back. So you could have done it either way. One has more steps than the other. Both are right as long as you keep that 0 equals. Questions there? Maya, go ahead and close your computer. Okay. Number 3, I saw some weird things with this one. 1, we cannot move this to the other side and combine those. They're not like terms. Now, some of us were doing this, which, yes, that would make these like terms, but we got rid of our variable. We cannot do that, okay? What you should have done is combine those two, do exactly what it says, not change anything, not do the opposite, just 4 plus 4 to get 8n. Make sure you're keeping those variables. Anytime you lose them, weird things start to happen. Divide both sides by 8. So that n equals 1. And remember that you can go back and put these numbers in. If I put negative 14 in for n, does that give me 938? And I could do that for all of these. These bottom ones you could still do. It would just be more of a process. Questions on that one? So a lot of the common mistakes I saw for this one were moving one of these terms over, dividing both sides by 4n, which would get rid of the n, so we wouldn't want to do that, or dividing both sides by 4 and then we have an n on both sides, which wouldn't help us because we got to get those both on the same side. Different variations of that. All right. 4, we either started that off right or we didn't. We should have cross multiplied. And remember, you can either go directly into the distributing part, or you can rewrite it first. When you do that, try to make sure the number is outside of your parentheses like this. Some some of us were switching that, and I think that threw off how we distribute. Then we should have distributed both sides. Then you had choices, what you wanted to move. Did not matter if you did this in one step or two. When you are moving variables across the equal sign, make sure you keep the variable with it. Don't do this, because these would not be like terms. I have to keep that variable with it. But the numbers you could just move. So whether you moved the 10 or the 11, at some point you got either x equals negative 6 or negative x equals 6, and you would have had to divide. So like what I'm about to do. I said that one. So if you move the 10, you got x equals negative 6. If you move the 11, you got negative x equals 6, and then you have to get rid of that negative because x isn't by itself. When you're putting your answer, make sure you're putting the variable equals that number. I saw just some numbers because we are solving for a variable, so we have to keep that with the answer. Any questions on that one? I know I'm going through this kind of fast just to get through all of these if we have any other questions.
What do you do after?
After this part, so what happened here is this canceled, became 0. This became negative 6, this became 1x, and this canceled. So this is just this. I just removed it. There was nothing left to do. Okay.
I get the way you answer. But here, the Q's do say show steps.
Nathan, did you have a question?
No.
Okay. And then if you see something specific to your quiz that maybe not everyone did, or I'm not talking about that common mistake, after we go through this, we can answer any questions you have also. Alright, this one, similar setup, distribute. Make sure you're distributing to both things. If we forget that last part, it throws the whole thing off. Be careful with your negatives, like in the next one. Most of us got this one unless we distributed incorrectly or moved something incorrectly. So here, again, you have choices. Does not matter what you move. If you see a plus, you should be doing the opposite and subtracting. You cannot combine like terms across the equal sign. So I can't say 14 plus 4. I can't do that. I have to move it. So if I'm doing this at the same time, this would give me 10x. That would cancel. That would give me 50. That would cancel. And I could divide both sides by 10. So Anderson, if this one had more, I would have kept going. Okay. Questions on that one? For the most part, we did pretty good in the top section. It was the bottom section that kind of gave us grief. Alright, this one had a bunch of different things that I saw went wrong. If you combine your like terms, remember you're doing whatever it says, same size, same operation, just add those two together. Make sure you are keeping your variable. A lot of us forgot our k's and then started adding numbers that weren't supposed to be added together. Be careful with your negatives. Make sure you're distributing to everything. Be careful here because we had a negative times a negative, so we would have got that positive at the end. You could have done one of two things here. Combine your like terms, so these two, or if you wanted to move these k's over individually at the same time, doesn't matter, you could have done either or. That would have been fine. Most of us just combine them. And then we would have had to move the k term over by adding. Which ended up being 111 also. And if we divided both sides by 111, we got 1. So there were 6 points you could have gotten for that. I tried to write, if you missed something, whatever, why ever you got points taken off, why that was. Questions on that one or that section in general? Now, on to this one. Great. So 7, 8, and 10 were probably the harder ones on this one. Some of us got this, and some of it was just, we need to simplify just a little bit further. So here, if I'm solving for A, 1, make sure you're solving for the right thing. Make sure you get the right variable at the end, that is by itself. So I'm trying to get A by itself. I gotta get rid of whatever is connected to it, maybe not directly first. So I can add 4 on both sides. I know I have this habit. Be careful when you're writing. I think some of us wrote Z, but then somehow it changed to a 2, and then it became a 6, so be careful when you're writing. And then here, we talked about this, but maybe we didn't practice it enough. When you have something that this can go into, like 2 can go into 4, I have to divide this separately. And when you do this, the negative is going to come either out front, or up top. So that you get negative Z over 2 minus 2 equals A. Some common mistakes I saw there, we subtracted the Z and 4 thing, didn't divide everything separately, or forgot the negative. Did you have any questions about that one? Number 2 is very similar, except we're not going to be dividing everything separately, but we do have to take care of the negative. So subtract 3 on both sides. I can divide this entire thing by negative 2, and the negative does this thing again. So I need to move that up front or out front. But if I do that, I want to make sure that I'm getting the whole thing. If you put it in the numerator, you would want to make sure that you're getting the whole thing and would have to use parentheses. Or you could multiply the negative into everything. Here.
Why did we divide by negative 2?
Because we're trying to get A by itself right here. So I got to get rid of this negative 2. And they're multiplying. So when things are next to each other, they're multiplying. And to undo that, we divide. Does that answer your question? Did that answer your question? Yes. So this one actually had 3 different answers you could have written, with the negative out front, with the negative in the numerator with parentheses, or you could have distributed that negative and changed the signs. So one of those 3 things, negatives are weird, so you won't see it in the denominator, has to be in the numerator or out front. A common mistake in general, some of us start writing minus whatever, but then when we rewrite it, we end up dividing. We got to keep those 2 things separate. If we're subtracting, just subtract. But if you're dividing, just divide. Try not to mix those 2 things. Okay. 9, we were getting x by itself. So the only thing you should have done here is to get rid of c. Move it by subtracting. Move it to the other side. So I saw a lot of this we subtracted, but then we also changed it to division. but this should have just been x equals d minus r minus c. There is no division there. We're not multiplying anything, so we can't divide anything. Questions on that one? Now 10 was similar, but different. So if we took the same approach, let's say we got rid of c, we have negative x equals d plus r minus c. Some of us left this like this, but x is not by itself, so we got to do something about that. Or some of us just got rid of the negative, but that doesn't help us actually solve it. It's still there, we can't just erase it. So remember, this is really negative 1, so I can divide each of these by negative 1, so that all the signs change. These negatives would cancel, become a positive. This would become a negative d. This would become a negative r. And this would become a positive c. Now this is just one way to do this problem. Do we have any questions on that way before I show you the second? So some of us got here, but we got to finish that. We can't leave that negative right next to x. The other way, erase this, is some of us saw, what if I moved x instead? And this was also the same thing here. Instead of moving 4 over, we decided to get rid of the 2a by adding it, and then moving g and going from that way, you would have still ended up with the same thing. So let's say I moved x instead. Right now that doesn't seem like it's doing much because now I have c by itself and not x. But I could also, from this point, get rid of d, get rid of r by moving it back to the other side. And I can do that at the same time. So we have c minus d minus r. They look different, but those are the same thing. So you could have done it either way. Questions on that one? So this is the part that a lot of us didn't understand. So if there's something that's not making sense, now would be a great time to ask questions. For 11, we had to get a by itself. C and a are next to each other. They're multiplying. To undo that, divide this entire side by c and do the same thing over here so that the c's cancel. That was it. So some of us were subtracting c, but again, we can't do that if these are connected. You have to do the opposite, divide. We can't separate things that are directly connected. Also vice versa, we can't join things that were never connected. In 12, we're solving for a. The nearest thing to a is the negative m. Get rid of that by adding. The m, I should have put at the end, but that part doesn't matter. The order there doesn't matter. And that was your final answer there. Do you have any questions on either of those two, this section in general? So, as I said last week, let me say this. I'm going to be replacing your quiz grades with your test grade. So if you do better on your tests, it will replace whichever section based on your test grade. Last class I said if you didn't finish, I wasn't going to replace it. I will be nice this time, but next time, if you don't finish, that will be the case. So I will still replace your test grade for this quiz. That will also happen for the Delta Maths if you did them, not if you never attempted them. as I mentioned last class, you have a choice. You can do a project or you can do the tests. Some of us, I talked to some of you. I'm going to quickly try to explain this. And then you can decide. So for the project, it is 2 parts, just like the test would be, 2 different parts. You're going to get a set of rules. You have to follow the rules. On each part, you're given a bunch of different rules, like for multi-step, to create your own equations. You can use your notes, but if you find a problem from the notes that matches, like, that has variables on both sides and would result in 0, you can't use that from the notes because I'll be checking our notes to make sure you're not using the same problems. You have to create your own equations. You're going to do that for both the literal and the multi-step. You're going to put your equations on posters, which I have. The front page has the same directions on the front and on the back, so don't do it twice. The only difference is what type of poster you'll be using. And you'll just see me for whichever poster you want. Each one has its own rubric, so you can see what you need to have in there. And like the test, I would like this done at the end of today's day, but you have time on your flex day as well to finish. And in general, for test projects, whatever, you have up until the next test to get that to me. But after that next test, you then have to retake. Or take your test as your retake. So get it done as soon as possible. Questions about the project? Anyone that I had previously not spoken to want to do the project? Okay. Alright. So that means unless you change your mind over lunch or I talked to you last class, you'll be doing the test instead.